This is Hannibal here from the Hannibal TV.com, Canada's most popular pro wrestling YouTube channel. And this is my weekly review of the points I find interesting in Dave Meltzer's Wrestling Observer newsletter. There's other stuff in here that I don't find that interesting, that I don't talk about. And this week's issue, the main topic, of course, was the big news story of the week: the passing of the Iron Sheik, WWE Hall of Famer, who was most known, I guess, for being the one to pass the WWE title from Bob Backlund to Hulk Hogan. And then, of course, he also had another main event run a little bit later in his career as Colonel Mustafa with Sergeant Slaughter. And prior to that, he had feuded with Sergeant Slaughter and tons of all-American type baby faces all over the territories. Apparently, he was listed at passing at 81 years old, but he wasn't sure, according to folklore, when his actual own birthday was. His age could have been anywhere from 80 to 1984. Dave Meltzer in The Observer brings up that he was basically synonymous with access, most notably drugs. And his gimmick in the later years was kind of this crazy drug filled wild man. His gimmick was partially taken from the legendary real Sheik, the original Sheik, Eddie Fairhat. And after the Iranian hostage crisis took place, he he really got over being from Iran. Apparently, his latest gimmick of the crazy drug induced madman type with all these Twitter posts was actually created by the Megan boys, Jim and Paige, Jim and Jan, Paige and Jan Megan. They're from Toronto, anyways. I know they produced his documentary. They ran his Twitter. They also run Virgil's Twitter, which is why I'm always a little bit leery of the GoFundMe's with Virgil. But apparently they came up with this gimmick, and they were one of his bookers. I know Eric Sims was also one of his bookers over the years. Sims was in that famous video where Sheik started yelling at Ultimate Warrior, and then Eric Sims tried to back him off, and he slapped Eric Sims a few times. Uh, Meltzer points out that the YouTube videos I guess it was, I seem to remember somewhere around 2007, 2008, 2009 is when Sheik really was popular on YouTube. When YouTube was first like breaking out as a popular platform, and his crazy videos were getting out there, and Meltzer brings up they were often anti-Semitic and anti-gay, and it eventually got him on Howard Stern, where he would insult the likes of Randy Savage, who he called quote unquote a cheap Jew, and made homophobic slurs about the Ultimate Warrior. Talked about sodomizing Brian Blair and Hulk Hogan. Brian Blair claimed in an RF Video Shoot interview that Iron Sheik had molested a ring boy, and they ended up going on to have a social media feud for years, where in the later years Blair dropped talking about the ring boy molestation allegations and came up with a story where the heat stemmed from Brian Blair allegedly tapping out the Iron Sheik in a house show match in the WWE, and claimed that Sheik held a grudge from that. Meltzer brings up that Sheik was first fired in 1987 when him and Hacksaw Duggan were pulled over and there was cocaine and marijuana found in the car. This made international news since the two were feuding at the time, driving together more so than the drugs. Of course, this was the days when marijuana was illegal in a lot more places. But it goes to show you that the Iron Sheik's harder drug use was going on since at least the 80s. So it's quite impressive he made the age that he did. Sheik then went to WCW in 1989, feuded with Ricky Steamboat and Sting, and then wasn't used for a year. However, his contract rolled over and he was paid $156,000 for a year where he was hardly used. And he ended up going back to WWE in 91 as Colonel Mustafa, where he headlined the 1991 SummerSlam, teaming with General Adnan and Sergeant Slaughter against Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior, where Warrior was famously fired after holding Vince up for money at that WrestleMania. Iron Sheik was later let go due to failing a drug test, but was brought back in 1996 to manage the Sultan, Rikishi, which, by the way, Sabu said in a shoot interview with me that he was originally supposed to be the Sultan with the original Sheik managing him. So that would have been pretty damn cool. Tiger Ali Singh was also managed at one point by the Iron Sheik before he was fired again for a drug test. I'll tell you guys a quick story about the Sultan that sticks out in my mind. It was from the Robert Gertin Arena in Hull, Quebec. I think it was the night after Survivor Series 96. WWE was at a low point. They only had about 900 at this show, even though Austin, Triple H, The Rock was on the show, but it was right after The Rock debuted, and he had wrestled the Sultan that night, I believe. And they were driving out together. I forget who was in the driver's seat, but in Hull, the parking lot for the wrestlers or hockey players or whatever was kind of fenced in, but the fans could kind of approach cars as they were driving out of the fence. And I remember that Rikishi, who was playing the Sultan, rolled down his window and was the heel and signed autographs for everyone. And The Rock, I'll never forget. And I mean, he probably changed a lot over the year, but I'll never forget this. The Rock put his hand like that over his head and like sat in the back seat like that, as if I'm going to hide my face, not sign any autographs. Well, meanwhile, the Sultan, the heel, happily signed autographs for everyone that was there. I don't remember who was in the front seat. I just remember that always stuck out to me. Just the motion he did and how kind of that hit his head perfectly and made the point clear to everyone. Hey, I'm not going to sign any autographs for you guys. But Rikishi's a good dude. And okay, so then we get into Meltzer talking about his Iron Sheik's last appearance being at the Legend Battle Royal in 2001 at WrestleMania that he won. Then he goes in to talk about the sad days where I guess he became addicted to crack, and he would sometimes sit in the lobby of the Ramada Hotel near the Atlanta airport with a replica title belt and bring 8x10s to sell to people randomly. And he, according to Meltzer, he would often go and get drugs after that. There's tons of stories online about his drug and alcohol use, and that he would sometimes even trade autographed pictures for crack cocaine. That's just sad. I don't know if the Sheik ever partook in the WWE's rehab program. Apparently his older daughter, Mariza Valziri, His real last name was murdered at 27 by her 38-year-old boyfriend, Charles Reynolds, in 2003. And Reynolds was convicted of the murder, which I guess was by strangulation, and died in prison in 2016. Sheik was inducted in the Hall of Fame in 2005. So, sorry to hear about that. I mean, a lot of people commented that Iron Sheik does all this crazy stuff and can say like very politically incorrect stuff and get a pass. And there's all these stories of him related to drugs and allegedly drugging people and so forth. But for some reason, he's the lovable, crazy drug addict that gets a pass. Don't ask me why. The Rock commented on his death. Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan. He's definitely, despite all the negative stuff, considered a lovable person by people in the wrestling business. As I said when he died, I only met him one time in person, or I was around him one time during WrestleCon 2013 when I was helping Billy Graham, where he was in character at a table nearby pretty much the whole time, just trying to sell as much as possible. And he did a great job of that. Great character. And then another time he was out of character at the George Tragos Luthez Hall of Fame, where he accepted an award. He was much more down to earth there. Again, he agreed to do an interview with me in the hotel lobby that day. I remember he was willing to take $500 to do an interview. Then the Megan boys cut right in front of him, said, "No, he's too busy to do any interviews today. We can do it next time he comes to Canada." And then they never got me that interview. So I don't know. I don't know about those two. But I will say this. He wasn't in character. He didn't appear to be under the influence of any drugs or alcohol at that Hall of Fame. I saw him right around Brian Blair many, many times during that weekend. And they never had a cross word. He was very subdued, very approachable, seemed like a nice guy. So Meltzer would know more about him than me. I don't know how much of his persona was a work or a shoot. I never personally saw him do any drugs or alcohol, although in certain videos he definitely seemed to be under the influence. And it's terrible that maybe he did eventually go into rehab, because for about the past 10 years or so, you never really saw any videos like that come out. So maybe he ended up getting clean towards the end. But it's sad that happened to him. WWE news: Roman Reigns has passed the 1,000-day mark as WWE champion. Hulk Hogan still has the most WrestleMania main events at 10. The Rock and Roman Reigns now have 7. Seth Rollins did an interview where he had basically commented that they had to do another title because Roman Reigns has the other two and is not working the house shows. Which, by the way, there's hardly any house shows these days. It seems like there's like at most 2 or 3 a week. Unless I'm missing something, it doesn't seem like there's hardly any. Far from the days where they had 2 or 3 crews on the road. But anyways, I don't think it's a bad idea to have a second champion, to eventually have that second champion face Roman Reigns, because it will build heat for that match. But as far as like if it's a legit, how can you say that's a legitimate world title when at the same time you're bragging about Roman Reigns being world champion for 1,000 days, and now you have another world champion? I think it takes away the value. But again, to build up to a match down the road, it definitely builds up to a future match. in a case where there's not that many credible, there pretty much is no credible Roman Reigns opponents left. He's beat everybody. Unless AEW guys' contracts start running out and they start hiring guys from AEW. But Tony Khan seems to be locking up all the biggest stars to multi-year deals. Apparently, Lesnar versus Rhodes at SummerSlam might be a bull rope match. It's not official yet. Braun Strowman, 39, underwent neck fusion surgery, and he's going to be out of action likely a year. It's funny that at one point when he wasn't really getting a lot of bookings during that period of time, he wasn't under WWE contract. He was alleging that he might go into bare knuckle fighting. If your neck problems are that bad, I could never have actually seen him do bare knuckle fighting. He did have an arm wrestling match against Devin Larratt at one point that he got destroyed in, which I don't think was that great for his image, but obviously that was quickly forgotten about. But I wish him a speedy recovery on that. The funniest thing from the time when Strowman was released by WWE was when he took that bathroom picture showing his abs that had the needle in the picture, which he claimed was for B12 shots, which of course everybody takes injectable B12 shots. Apparently, Nick Khan is going to use more and more main roster on the NXT show. Try and build the brand up. They're going to have Seth Rollins face Braun Breaker for that version of the world title on NXT soon. I do think Braun Breaker should be the one to end the streak of Roman Reigns. I 100% believe that. He definitely has the biggest potential by far of anyone on the roster. Dave Meltzer says there's some corrections to announce. WWE is like fudging numbers a bit on shows, according to Meltzer and Wrestle Tickets. Apparently, last year's SummerSlam, they're claiming was 48,449 people in the building. Actual attendance was 41,708, according to this. Extreme Rules in Philadelphia, they announced 15,944. Actual attendance, he says, was 12,136. Survivor Series in Boston, they said 15,609. Actual attendance, 12,375. Elimination Chamber in Montreal, they said 16,000 in attendance. Actual attendance, 11,744. And other ones, they claimed that the Raw in Boston with John Cena had, okay, I missed what they claimed, but the actual number was 12,235. WrestleMania Night 1, they claimed 80,497. Actual attendance was 63,243. WrestleMania Night 2, actual attendance was 81,000. Or sorry, they claimed 81,395. Actual attendance was 64,288. So impressive numbers. Why they fudged the numbers, I don't know. And this is what Meltzer and Wrestle Tickets are reporting. I don't know the actual numbers. I'm guessing they call the arenas and get these numbers directly. Omos married his girlfriend over the weekend in Kissimmee, Florida, where I believe Haku lives. Drew McIntyre just became a U.S. citizen. And apparently the reason he's been out since WrestleMania is he's been mourning the death of his sister-in-law. Sorry to hear about that. The SmackDown in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania last week, where they always seem to draw a good crowd, was 88,300 paid. No attendance from the Raw in Hartford, but Vince McMahon and a lot of the WWE office was there. In AEW news, apparently, other than streaming, there's nothing about Collision airing in the UK or Canada on actual TV. Punk has moved Collision tickets in Chicago. They're at 8,200 about sold right now at the United Center, which can hold about 20,000. But everywhere else, tickets aren't moving. In Toronto, they're in another 20,000 seat arena and have about 1,800 tickets sold. In Hamilton, they only have about 700 tickets sold in another 20,000 seat arena. In Regina, Saskatchewan, they only have about 1,300 tickets sold. Calgary, which is their debut in the Calgary market, has over 3,000 sold, which is their best Canadian pre-sale for Collision. And that's during Stampede Week in Calgary, where people are traveling from all over the world. Then Newark, New Jersey, New York City market, over 4,000 tickets sold. It's 4,148. As far as Rampage, Meltzer brings up that the May 23rd edition of Rampage, it didn't even make the top 50 shows of the network that week, which is barely half of the viewership they were doing a few months ago. So Rampage is really tanking. They're getting the money for it from the TV station. So I guess that's all that matters. But now that there's going to be yet another TV show, I can only see Rampage interest going down even more. It's like more is not always better. I can understand if it's really 200 million or more that they're getting to produce all this content for Warner Brothers Media. I can understand how it's worth it. But they don't have like huge star power in AEW to support all these shows. Apparently the tapings that they did in Orlando for Ring of Honor at Universal will be the last tapings they do for Ring of Honor that are Ring of Honor alone tapings, which they air on the streaming service, because Ring of Honor is going to be taped Saturdays with the Collision shows. The Dynamite tapings this week in Colorado Springs had 2,800 paid. In other wrestling news, Kevin Von Erich said that Ross and Marshall Von Erich, who are now free agents, by the way, did stunt work on the Von Erichs movie, and Carrie's daughter, Holly, was involved in the filming. I know that when I was hanging out with Lacey a couple of years ago, I'll be honest, she was telling me about this movie, and I didn't believe it. And I believe one of the producers for the movie was actually with us one night in Dallas. So I don't know what involvement Lacey has, if she has anything to do with the movie or not. I know she told me about a year or so ago that she was trying to keep a low profile. By the way, Rick Bassman's Jerusalem show is taking place September 14th. And there's going to be more information on that on this channel and interviews related to that show on this channel. So that should be pretty exciting. In other non-WWE and AEW news, New Japan ran one of its three biggest shows of the year, Dominion, on June the 4th in Osaka, drew 7,040 paid, which apparently was up from last year, but a long way away from the 12,000 seat sellouts they were doing before their decline in popularity. The show featured Lance Archer, Will Ospreay, Jack Sabre Jr., Jeff Cobb, John Moxley, and Claudio Castagnoli, as well as Sonata and others. In MMA news, the KWS European MMA show featuring Mariusz Pudzianowski of the World's Strongest Man had over 50,000 fans in Warsaw, Poland on June 3rd, which was one of the largest crowds in the history of MMA. Brandon Monreno. Sorry, I don't follow the flyweight division of UFC, but he's the UFC flyweight champion. He's going to be wrestling on July 15th at Triple Mania in Tijuana. Oh, by the way, AEW ran some house shows over the weekend in Tufelo. They drew a little over 1,500, and in Huntsville, they drew about 2,200. Meltzer noted that there was very little merchandise available at these shows, and most of the popular items weren't there. He's unsure if they're going to keep doing house shows because they're not using the top stars on these shows, and as fans realize that it's the undercard talent on these shows. And some of the results on this show, I'm seeing names like Pat Buck, who's like an agent for AEW. So I know John Moxley was advertised for a couple house shows in the past and then didn't end up being on them. So as word gets around about that, and now they're doing collision tapings every week, Meltzer is unsure if they're going to keep doing house shows. The first episode of Dark Side of the Ring featuring Chris and Tammy did a 0.05 rating. By the way, the Abdullah the Butcher episode that I'm on airs July the 25th. UFC Ultimate Fighter featuring Conor McGregor did a 0.14 rating. Andrei Arlovsky competed in his 40th UFC fight on UFC on ESPN at the Apex June 3rd. He was knocked out in the second round. He's 44 years old now. Dana White says he should consider retirement. The show did a 0.28 rating. I always liked Arlovsky, but it seems now he's collecting a paycheck. I mean, he's still getting knocked out in the second round. He passed the first round, but he used to be UFC champion. But I can understand not wanting to turn down paychecks. Yeah, the documentary about Sheik was produced by the Mayhem Boys, and I think they blocked him from doing shoot interviews after that documentary came out. Gonzo brings up he loves how he would stay in character, still hating his old opponents after 30 years. Jake the Snake also does that, by the way. I love Jake the Snake, but I'm sorry the story about you can't do a DDT safely on the outside and Ricky Steamboat was seriously injured by the DDT and so forth. He's still selling it. Good for him. UFC Hop. That's right. I don't think I ever saw the Iron Sheik wrestle live. I don't think I ever saw it. I didn't know he lost his daughter either. But maybe if he hadn't been so screwed up on drugs, he would have seen that coming a bit more. Who knows? I mean, I'm not holding that against him. That stuff's horrible. That stuff is horrible, man. It ruins lives. Say no to drugs. Rick Steiner's boy should beat Reigns. I fully agree, and I really hope they don't have him drop to Rollins. JM agrees with me on something I said. I don't think Sami Zayn will ever beat Roman Reigns now. I mean, I think his popularity peaked. WWE doesn't need house shows anymore. That's true. But I do remember as a fan, I used to love house shows as a kid. I was so obsessed with wrestling as a kid. I would always like have a calendar counting down the house. At that time, they came to Ottawa 3 times a year. Now it looks like they're going to start coming here 2 times a year, but they used to come to like smaller cities around the area too. Now they go to much fewer other cities. They just go to like the main cities and want people to like drive, like Quebec. Now they go to Montreal and Quebec City, and for a long time they were just going to Montreal when they used to go to at least 8 towns in Quebec. I know they used to go to Rimouski, Drummondville, Shawinigan, Val-d'Or. They've been to Chicoutimi. They've been to all sorts of other towns, but they really cut down. But that's their business model. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. The wrestlers have it a lot easier. I don't think they're going to give Cody Roman Reigns his title. I'll be perfectly honest. I think that would be a mistake. I think Braun Breaker has more of an upside. Goldberg, I mean, if he goes anywhere, I could see him appearing on that AEW UK show. I don't think Seth Rollins is going to end the streak. Malik misses the house show. Oh, but as I was saying, I would always count down to the house shows, and I was such an obsessive wrestling fan. I guess you could say I'm still obsessed with wrestling news, but after they would happen, before they would announce another one, I would be like, oh my God, a week ago, I was at this time, this match was going on. Or last night, I remember this match was going on. I would think about the wrestling shows nonstop. I was such a fan. Now I am more interested in UFOs than wrestling. This picture came out from a police body cam, by the way, in Las Vegas, of a UFO that was captured by a police body cam, May the 1st. Now we have officials coming out saying that apparently the U.S. has at least 12 UFOs in their possession. And there's very credible people that are calling for Congress to get to the bottom of this whole UFO thing, which I'm extremely interested in. And it seems like, guys, disclosure is actually happening. And before I go, July the 15th, Great North Wrestling in Smith Falls featuring Carlito, Nunzio against the Blood Hunter, Canadian champion Jeremy Prophet, Magnum McLaren, and much more. Tickets are selling very well for that show. It's our first time in Smith Falls since the pandemic, and we had very good feedback on the first Great North Wrestling event from the relaunch that happened May 6th. So tickets are on sale now at ticketweb.ca for that one. Wish everyone a wonderful Saturday.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and click the subscribe button.